Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Karl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion, or we want to be contemplative, or simply ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to welcome you to our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that resonate with our fellow friends and seekers here in the desert.
Our hope is that you will find life for your body, soul, and spirit.
And now, here is our show. Before we get started with today's guests, let's check in with Karl and JD.
Hi, and welcome to our segment called Karl and JD, mainly because it's Karl, which is me, and JD, which is also Jordan. And we were just talking about in Taiwan, where he lives, it's Jordan.
Do you remember?
It's Jordan Fur. I never say things right with the right intonation. So it's say it, Jordan.
Even if you just have Fu.
And so does
it's
that
it's a rising tone, like you're asking a question.
Yeah, like my eyebrows would go up when I say that, Jordan Fu.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, so I tried to speak Mandarin when I was there, and people just look at me like, good try, keep working at that. And they wanted to speak English.
On the back, that's all right.
Yeah, so you got to help me today. I got a terrible review for the hotel. Now, we just interviewed somebody yesterday that was raving about the hotel. It was a page turner, but this customer, this verified purchase on Amazon with no name, says, to my knowledge, Karl Forehand, the author, still lives in a small town. In his book, he generally puts down small towns and the people that live in them. This is very interesting to me! Writing is very therapeutic, but childhood abuse and trauma requires professional counseling. I know some about the Alp Hotel, but gained very little information about the hotel from this book. From being a former pastor and now degrading organized religion is very concerning to me. The fact that he's criticizing my writing, which he's not really criticizing my writing, and then using incorrect grammar to criticize me is concerning to me. But he ends his eloquent review with, he seems to be a very troubled soul.
Well, childhood trauma requires a professional help, but Amazon reviews don't.
That's right.
I think is what we learned.
And we learned that, well, he gave me 2 stars. He could have gave me a 1, but he gave me a 2 for something. I'm not sure what I did right, but I did 3 stars wrong.
Classic Christian generosity.
Yeah. So I know people don't like it because so far in my novels, the church people have been sort of the villain. They're not necessarily saying that their beliefs are wrong, but that kind of draw out that stuff. And in the book, the focus was on other things besides religion. Religious people were just kind of the side thing. And I think you can point out the good and the bad of Christianity, but they always take it personally. Mm-hmm. Like they've never done anything wrong. Only they know about counseling, professional counseling, and so on. So anyway,
what I'm really looking forward to is someone that gives you like a 1 or 2 star, but it's because they're really angry about how you've portrayed the hotel industry.
Uh-huh.
They're like, damn it, Karl, you really portrayed the concierge service in a very disturbing light. I think you should seek help.
Yeah. The it's there's a part of me that wants to take it really personally, but then it's usually just so ridiculous that I don't, I would rather I'd rather them say this is kind of poorly written, and I could probably go along with that, except that my editor did a lot of work on it and fixed all the stuff. I'm thinking of giving my editor like author status on the new novel, because there's so far there's 3,000 changes. In 72,000 words, there's 3,000, and most of them are like changing the whole line. It's really interesting. She doesn't change the meaning of it, but the fact that it's had to have 3,300 changes is kind of monumental to me.
And now back to the Desert Sanctuary podcast with Karl and Laura Forehand. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary. I'm Laura Forehand, and I'm here with Karl Forehand, and we have a special guest today that we're going to get ready to talk to. Before we start, what do you have that's new and exciting and you need to share with all the listeners?
Yeah, I was going to do an April Fool's joke, but this won't air on April 1st. It's April 1st today, so just going to let people know there's a bunch of videos that we've been putting out on YouTube over the last few years, kind of as we're going through things and writing books and talking about those. So there's a lot of videos out there. Some of them are really good, and then since like 40 episodes ago or so, since episode 200. We started putting them out onto YouTube also. So I don't know if anybody else gets frustrated with YouTube. I mean, with podcast services, because like we're doing 2 a week right now. And so you get up to that 10 spot pretty fast. And then their podcast is already kind of cycled off, and you can find it if you're diligent enough, but it's a little harder to find it. So they're all out on YouTube now, and they've just come up with the banner, and you can hear it. It's still not video, but it is video, but it's not video.
Right. That's interesting. It's video, but it's not video.
Yeah. Anyway, we have Justin Tang on the program today, and I'm excited about that. So let's get to that.
Yeah. So Justin is an ex-vangelical certified hypnotist and trauma-informed coach who is passionate about change work and psycho-spiritual healing. After realizing that the church and religion didn't have the answers to his deep pain and sense of inadequacy, Justin began to search outside of the church and deconstruct his deeply held core beliefs. It was in this process that Justin discovered a variety of time-tested modalities and proven principles that not only facilitated healing and transformation within himself, but also within others. Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary, Justin. We're glad that you're with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to have this conversation.
Yeah, and I just like the way that you worded that. It's TRANCE dash formation. That's really cool. We can talk about that later.
Yeah.
But welcome to the program. We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
You have interviewed me before. That was a little while ago. But we're excited to have you here. And just to kind of catch everybody up, we're not necessarily focusing on that period of deconstruction, but go back as far as you need to tell your story, and tell as much as you want to tell, and then we'll kind of go from there. It'll go quickly.
Yeah. Well, I'm in Dallas, Texas, which is belt buckle of the Bible Belt, and this is home. This is where my family is, my friends are, and so I grew up here. And what I like to say is, and to joke, is that we love guns, we love steak, and we love Jesus, and that's just the culture here. So I grew up in church in a conservative Asian Christian household, and just grew up believing the Bible. I went to, I remember going to a Billy Graham event long time ago when I was a kid, and all I remember is I was going up in front, praying the sinner's prayer, please help me go to heaven, whatever it was. But I mean, I did that a lot, right? I would keep going to these different maybe camps or conferences and feeling like, oh, I just need to be resaved again and again. But that was just kind of what it was for me. And so I would say right around middle school was when I started to take my faith a little bit more seriously. And my parents started going to a charismatic church, but it was like a house church. And they started going to what's called IHOP, not pancakes, but International House of Prayer. And they were big into that. And so we started going to these conferences. And I remember in one conference, I picked up a little bookmark in front of the table. And it said, "Not my job." And it had a picture of a like the road street. And there was like a dead rat and it was painted over. Right. So it was like, not my job that, I should pick this up and throw it away. But the whole idea, this was from Living Waters Ministries with Kirk Cameron and Ray Comfort. And that's when I was exposed to their method of evangelism. And they're all about guilt tripping. They're all about fear. And, but they had a point that if in order for this gospel, this Christian gospel to make sense, like you have to have a hell, you have to have sin, you have to have guilt. And so that was when I started to, try to evangelize my friends using these kind of guilt tripping questions. Like, did you ever tell a lie? Did you, have you ever stolen anything? Have you ever looked at, and I tried to save them and it didn't really work very well, but that was my start into, I would say, evangelism. And let me try to fast forward this. But so going into college, I carried that same zeal, even though I had a little bit of doubt, but this is when I was exposed to campus ministry. And exposed to, hey, we got to save the campus, right? We have to tell other people about Jesus. So I would be that guy to, walk up to somebody and say, "Excuse me, have you ever told a lie? If you die today, would you go to heaven?" Right? Try to start those kind of conversations. And going into that, I got really passionate about apologetics, about evangelism, and the Bible. Of course, I've read the entire Bible, and so I was gung ho about Jesus, about all of this. And then I would say 2-3 years after college, I was in a ministry, kind of exiting this campus ministry. And I would say just a series of different things happened. I knew the Bible. I knew all the right answers. And somehow I still had this sense of deep pain and inadequacy, what my bio said. And a lot of different things happened all at once, and it just made me kind of stop and just question a little bit. I wasn't giving up God or Jesus or the Bible. I was still a very devoted, dedicated Christian, but I just had to pause. And I began to look outside of the church because I'm like, look, I know the Bible, and this isn't quite working for me. And I've always been like a personal development junkie, so I went to these secular sources, and I challenged. I think the first thing I probably challenged was the dating culture and purity culture. But once I started questioning that, it was like this chain reaction, perhaps, or just there's this momentum, right? Like I just challenged one thing, and then I started to challenge another thing, and it wasn't just little things, but like deep, like the core fundamental doctrines. And that put me into a conundrum and a spiral, right? Because this was my whole life. My entire identity was built on this. I was in ministry. I remember singing songs about, Jesus, I will never leave you. I'll never leave and forsake you. And this was not part of the plan at all. But long story short, it was a very painful deconstruction. And I think, in some ways, I'm continuing to deconstruct and reconstruct as we all are, continuing to evolve. And it was through that process I stumbled upon the chakra system. I stumbled upon a method called releasing, or the Sedona method, and shadow work and different parts therapy and things like that. And I view deconstructing faith along with if you want to call it shadow work, if you want to call it healing, I view those things kind of on the same track. And so it was all kind of just blended together, and I discovered more things about myself in this deconstruction. I became much more like authentic, and I just I've just been growing and evolving in different ways, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But yeah, just to cut a long story short, here I am. And I love to share this stuff with other people too.
Yeah. You have kind of a live program, is that right?
Yeah.
Or is
Yeah,
it?
podcast, a YouTube channel. So I'll interview different people that I just find interesting. Generally, it'll deal with deconstruction or religious trauma or some kind of alternative spirituality, because I did explore a lot of that. And one of the things that helped me get over the fear of hell was briefly studying near-death experiences and realizing that across many, many different spiritual traditions, people have generally speaking, there are hellish entities, but many of them are very, very positive. They report going through a tunnel of light. They report maybe seeing their loved ones and their family, or some kind of guide or God himself, itself, herself, or having some kind of really positive experience and coming back here with a sense of safety, of love and security. And so that was actually really crucial. Sometimes I forget that I studied that stuff, but yeah, that was crucial in overcoming the fear of hell and really being open to different kinds of spiritualities.
Mm-hmm. And Laura and I, we kind of sat out here on the edge of Christianity is what we feel like. We kind of sat out here in the desert on the edge of Christianity, and there's a couple of things we feel like we're called to do, but some days it feels like you're just yelling at each other, going, your mama, and no, your mama. It's that kind of interaction. And I don't like that. It doesn't do anything beneficial. But what we also hear out here is we hear stories of number one, people's trauma inside Christianity. We also hear their stories after they've made it away, and some of them are succeeding, and none of them really are sliding down the slippery slope or falling into some kind of pit, or they're not nihilist like people think. People say, right, well, you have to either have faith or nihilism, or faith or the pit, or whatever they say. It's from Nietzsche and things like that. We actually see people thriving. That's the subtitle of our book, Thriving Outside of Organized Religion. What ways have you been able to thrive or feel like you've used the word evolved since you've made that decision to become inquisitive, and it's led to revelation and so on? But how have you evolved? Or did you slide down the slippery slope into the pit and it's horrible now? So can you talk about all that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that myself, that people, and it's definitely a temptation to use a Christian word. But I think all of us need to go through, I suppose, the pit at some point, or at least come face to face with it. And so for me, I never realized just how much anger I really held. And I would, for a long, long time, be in denial of all the anger I held. And finally, doing this shadow work, or whatever you want to call it, that's when I came face to face with that. And I had to go through a period when I was angry, and angry at everyone, angry at the church, angry at Jesus, at my parents, at myself, and just the world, everything, right? And so I did go through a period where I still do this from time to time, Karl and Laura, but I'll argue with Christians on Facebook or some social media platform, and just a keyboard warrior, every once in a while that'll happen. But I had to go through that stage, but then also accept that anger, understand it, and express it in a safe way. And I recommend, if you can, have someone that is trained, if it's a counselor or a coach or whoever it might be, that can be helpful. So I had to go through that. And, I'm continuing to embrace my anger, which is not a bad thing. It's neither a good nor a bad thing. I'm continuing to embrace my authenticity, my sexuality, a lot of these things that purity culture really programmed into me is it's just garbage, in my opinion. And so I've really come to a place where, and I'm not perfect, but I've come to a place where I've been more and more self-accepting, more authentic, and more, I would say, less dogmatic about things. Rather than seeing the world where it's black and white, right? It's either, you're for Jesus or you're against him, right? You're in the kingdom of darkness or you're in the kingdom of light, and there's no in between. You're saved or you're unsaved. Rather than viewing things like that, especially getting to this work in trauma, you start to understand why people do things. And that's not necessarily an excuse for, their actions, but you have a general empathy and an understanding, like, okay, I get why this is happening. And so I just see there's a lot of gray out there, and I can actually listen. I've gotten better at listening, and I continue to get better. Not perfect, but every day in every way, I'm getting better and better. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. So we've had discussions online with people, I mean, in a civilized setting, on a podcast or something, where, maybe a current pastor would say, it's all right to go investigate, but don't be angry, but like you're pointing out, if that's what I'm feeling, that's what I need to be present with, right?
Yes.
It's definitely there for a reason. It's built into us for a reason. And like you said, it can lead to our healing, to recognize that, to ask questions of it. Why is this anger here?
Yes.
But I think to push it down would be just to do what we did in church, to spiritually bypass it, act like it's not there, hope it magically goes away, but it doesn't, right?
Yep. Yeah. And it will grow. It will grow into bitterness and resentment, and it will cause all sorts of problems. Not just emotional, but I mean, the unconscious mind can do all sorts of things. It might manifest in physical illnesses or ailments. So yeah, for sure, that it does need to be addressed and accepted.
I wonder if, like, the pit, the dark night, we hear so many stories that talk about, like, the dark night of the soul, that pit of darkness or whatever that I think happens in deconstruction. Do you think that's a necessary step, if you will? I think, like, when you were talking, Justin, here's what I thought. I thought that's where we are going to find our true selves, right? Because that's all the stuff we've been stuffing down for so long. Like you said, there's nothing wrong with anger. There's nothing wrong with sadness. There's, all these emotions and feelings we've been told for so long that, if we really are a child of God, we won't have those. And, so I'm just like, when you were talking, it just got me curious to think, well, maybe that's just a natural part of what needs to happen in this deconstruction. And that's maybe where we're going to start to uncover our authentic self, is in this darkness, in this pit. Not that we are dark, like when you, because, we, in the church, we think of, like, darkness as being like satanic or hell, or somehow we're connected to Satan or whatever. But I don't feel that that's what it is. I feel like it's so dark down there because that's where I'll, maybe that shadow is that you're talking about. That's where I've stuffed everything. So I think it's, for me, as you were talking, I feel like that's an important piece of my deconstruction, to say that's where I need to go to start kind of peeling the layers, or shining light, or however you want to say it, to really, see what's down there and see what's really true and authentic for me and what is not. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Is it necessary? It could be. I think whatever naturally unfolds, I think there's a reason for that. But is it necessary?
Well, I like how you just worded that. Whatever unfolds. So maybe it is necessary for some, maybe it's not for others. But and either, like you said, there's no black or white.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what your experience is what's true for you. I don't know. That's a good way to put it.
A lot of times the anger in my life is that the people who should have done something about things didn't do it. You know, whether that was when I was a child and I wasn't cared for in the right way, or whether it was, you know, the zealous evangelical who harmed people. You know, we stopped calling it church hurt. Now we call it church harm, which is more accurate, I think. But if people have been harmed, that ought to provoke something in me that deeply cares about that not happening again. That would be enough to motivate me to investigate further and investigate for myself why I'm feeling that way.
Yeah. You know, anger is a very powerful emotion, and it's an indicator, you know, and especially when there's some kind of unmet expectation or perceived injustice. Absolutely. There should be a healthy sense of anger. Yeah.
So you mentioned shadow several times. I would call a lot of our work shadow work that we've done. To us, it came through some Benedictine sisters, or for me, and then kind of transferred to Laura, where they were teaching spiritual direction. And when they did, they would investigate, you know, what do you feel? Where do you feel it? And then they would let you talk and they would listen. And then they would encourage you to be present with whatever comes up.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when you would do that, at the end of that session, something had shifted, something had changed. And it's not that we weren't going to be triggered by similar things, but instead of reacting, we learn to respond, or pause and respond to that instead of. That's how I would describe shadow. Is that similar to your understanding? You do hypnotherapy like that, so you work with shadow there, or how would you explain it differently?
Yeah. I think everyone has their own definition of shadow or shadow work. And I'm probably just going to talk along the same lines. To me, shadow work is really accepting all the different layers, all the different parts of you, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, or whatever it is. And so, yeah, if there is an unconscious mind, and if there are layers, if there are parts, then I do think that probably shadow work is necessary. And there are parts that we've repressed or exiled that we're just not aware of, that need to come to the light and understood. And they can be unburdened, you know, they can be transformed. And every part is not, I'm familiar with a particular psychotherapy system called internal family systems, which in recent years have become very popular. But there's a saying in there that, you know, there's no bad part. Every part has a positive intention. We just have to try to understand what's happening.
Right.
And so I like what you said about having, like, pausing, and then what was the second word you said?
I said
Pause and
if we can just pause and then react, and I mean not react, but respond.
Pause and respond. I like that. And I think that is what meditation can do for us, like mindfulness meditation, just being aware of our thoughts and feelings. I think that's super, super important. It's not necessarily shadow work, but I think it's very complementary. And yeah, I love how you said that. It's like we have this ability to pause and then respond in whatever way that we feel fit. Powerful.
Yeah. Laura mentioned a word a minute ago, authenticity. I'll just ask you that open-ended. How important is authenticity to this journey?
Everything. I think it's, but you know, this is just my opinion, right? Everyone's journey is going to be different.
Yeah.
I do think that religion, whether it's intentional or unintentional, it really inhibits us to be authentic. I think it's such a a tragedy, right? Because I don't think it's necessarily intentional all the time. But yeah, there's just so much that is lost within evangelicalism and within religion. And I think the whole journey of deconstruction and shadow work and all of this is really like we get to trust ourselves. We get to come back to who we are, come home. And in that, I think we can let our light shine. We can be what the world needs us to be. It's not a selfish thing. Or perhaps it is. It can be a selfish thing, but I don't think that's necessarily bad all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And
Right.
When we are a strong, authentic, unique individual who has a conscience, I think we all do. I don't think any of us come into this trying to intentionally harm anyone.
Right.
I think we all have a conscience, and when we come to our full authentic selves, like that's what the world needs.
I agree. Yeah. So I wanted to kind of go back to hypnotherapy because it was mentioned earlier, but how does that help people? How does it help someone gain what they feel like they have lost? So talk about how hypnotherapy might be utilized for people that have experienced religious trauma.
Yeah.
How are you able to help them with that?
Right. Yeah. So with trauma, we have to understand that number one, it's subjective.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not necessarily the event or events, but it's whatever the subconscious mind or the body really interprets that event to mean, right? That meaning that we give inside of us. So, one person can experience the same events in church, right? And it'll just be water off a duck's back. Right. It won't really hurt them as much. But another person, same thing, but it deeply, deeply hurts them to the point where they're carrying this trauma or bad beliefs that really haunt them in the coming years or decades. So when we understand that trauma is all at an unconscious level, and that's what hypnotherapy does. Hypnosis, all it is a tool. That's all it is. And it helps us to communicate with the unconscious mind. And if we can start to speak the language of the unconscious mind, which is the language of feelings, the language of dreams or metaphors, or all these different things, it's more of a right brain kind of activity, so to speak. And when we get to speak the language, then we can actually start to communicate and say, okay, what's happening here? What's happening under the hood, and how can we fix it? So yeah, hypnosis can be used in a variety of ways, not just with religious trauma, but certainly when we dig into the unconscious mind and we're doing this shadow work, hypnosis can be used with that. So one of the techniques you can do is to put someone in hypnosis and then have them regress back all the way to their, the very first memory, right? The root cause, so to speak. And if you're able to take them back with guidance and with their loving presence, their healthy adult consciousness. So having them experience that again, but now we're taking that healthy adult consciousness and reframing the entire thing, right? We're making a new meaning out of it. We're changing the, I hate to say memories, but the emotional learnings and the memories that are associated with that memory and totally changing that. And if you can do that, you can trigger what's called therapeutic memory reconsolidation. And that's just a big fancy term to say that, hey, our brain has a natural ability to do this, to heal, to change things. And like it can be rapid. It doesn't have to take years and years of therapy. It can be 1 session, 2 sessions, 3 sessions, but it all depends on the person. So that's one thing that you can do. But I will say this, don't just, run into regression. A lot of hypnotherapists, I think, are poorly trained in that and are doing it wrong. And so there is a risk if you're not with someone that's skilled and someone that is trained in regression, that you can install false memories. So it's important to just always keep it very open. And whatever the subconscious mind comes up with, It doesn't matter whether it's true or not true. It's whatever the subconscious mind is perceiving to be true.
Mm-hmm.
That's what needs to be worked on, right? So we're not trying to instill false memories, but just working with whatever the subconscious mind perceives as truth. So that's just one way that we can use hypnosis to work with religious trauma.
I'm just curious, like, so many times I like struggle to find the right words to explain or express, you know, maybe especially when I'm feeling like, I don't know, like in a hyper arousal state, maybe like something has triggered me or whatever. Do you find that when people come to you and you're able to use hypnotherapy with them, that they're able to better, you know, communicate things to you? And that's kind of a rough way of saying, like, I struggle with words, especially when it's just a, you know, high intense situation. And I really can't express like why this is triggering to me or why this is making me so upset. So I guess I'm just asking, like, are people able to maybe speak more freely if they're in this more relaxed hypnotic state?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I will say, yeah. So generally speaking, yes, definitely when you're more in a deeper hypnotic state, then you're more open to whatever is going on in the unconscious mind, generally speaking. But I don't find that to be the case all the time. And my guess on why that's happening is there's some kind of, either they're not deep enough, that could be one thing, and they're just a very analytical person, or there's some other part of them that is really preventing that to happen. And so you really have to address this other part first before you can then go to the actual concern.
Yeah, that makes sense.
One thing, and as we've been talking with people, and they identify those feelings, they identify what they're feeling, and maybe even able to connect it with what they were thinking at the time and why, and they get a little bit of why in there. But then you ask them about, is there a voice that a critical voice? You know, it's either yours or your parents or somebody's that's still going on inside there. And they'll say, yeah. And a lot of times they say, well, it's not what I should be feeling. You know, it's not what's allowed. And I think what, of course, people need professionals, they need coaches and people like you. Sometimes we encourage them to just say, ask them kind of, is it okay to feel this? Is it okay to feel what you're feeling? You know, and I think once people realize that, then they can be present with it, then they can address it.
Yes.
You know, but as long as, well, I shouldn't be feeling this, I'm not allowed to feel this. I can't trust it. That was the other word you used before. You said, trust yourself. How important is that?
Yeah, I think, that goes back to authenticity. And the core of religious programming is to not trust yourself. You know, one of the most famous verses, and it's like in Jeremiah, I'm probably misquoting this, 17 somewhere, the heart is deceitfully wicked and who can trust it? You know, taking that one verse out of context in that one particular translation, right? And now it's the staple of evangelicalism and of right thinking. It's just
pastoral
nonsense.
counseling. It's
Oh my gosh,
pastoral counseling.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible. Yeah. And so I think a lot of the work is to be able to trust yourself. And I know coming out of evangelicalism, that feels like, oh my gosh, this is the devil. Like, no, learn to not trust you have to trust in the Lord, whatever definition of the Lord, lean not on your own understanding. But no, what if your understanding is actually the divine trying to talk to you, if you believe in the divine, right?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, like, we all have to look ourselves in the mirror. And the one person you will have to live with is you.
Mhm.
So I hope you
Right.
you get to trust yourself, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
You have any practices? Everybody's practices are different, and Laura and I had a discussion online one time where we were discussing that in real time, and we were like, well, I don't even know if I have any practices yet, because I kind of stripped all the old ones away, and now we're trying to develop them. But what practices do you have out here in the desert?
Sure. Yeah, I would say that mindfulness meditation is one thing I go back to, and just observing the breath, letting thoughts come up and pass and go, and whatever my judgments are of them, I observe them as well. And that naturally kind of progresses into what's called releasing, which is more of an active mindfulness. So once we're able to observe and accept, we can just gently ask ourselves, ask our bodies, could I accept this, or could I let this go? And you're not trying to force anything at all. You're just gently asking, like a gentleman, and just seeing what comes up. And you'd be surprised. Sometimes the answer is yes. And you'll feel a shift. And be like, whoa, yeah, I can let that go. And so that's been like a huge foundation for me, is the letting go technique. But I'll also do, like, lately I've been doing more work with chakras and just visualizing. And so I can visualize anchors or roots coming from my feet into the earth, into Mother Earth, and having the same thing, right? Roots from Mother Earth come into me and grounding me. At the same time, I can, imagine there's like wisdom coming down from the universe or from Father Sky, and meeting at my heart, right? And imagining my chakras are opening. And for anyone that's not familiar with chakras, they're just they're supposed to be energy centers, right? Representing, I would say, different parts of our psyche. But yeah, that's something that I've been doing recently, and that's been helping. It's been cool to just get into that visualization. One thing I will do every once in a while is chant, actually. And it's funny, I learned this from a bhakti yoga person, and he would chant the name of Ram, which is a Hindu deity. And it's the strangest thing. When I start chanting this, I start to feel bliss. And it's the same bliss that I would feel in these Holy Spirit charismatic meetings. It was the same thing. And I'm like, wow, this is insane. And sometimes when I chant, I'll actually have the unction to start speaking in tongues too. So it is strange that every once in a while I will speak in tongues, but I just have a different meaning now.
It's good.
Yeah.
I feel like these different practices that we're hearing as we talk to people, and some of them we're even doing ourselves, like when you're talking about doing mindfulness meditation and chakra work and things like that. I mean, those are things that we're looking into and starting to practice ourselves. And I feel like that really, I don't know, gives me a sense of agency that I have never had before. Right. So it's like, you're talking about going inside, and it's like you are in charge of, communicating with yourself and saying, I'm going to let this pass, or no, I'm not ready to let this go. And I just think that's so beautiful that, and there's been so many years for me anywhere where I always looked outside, or somebody else was telling me what to do or what to think or what to hold on to or what to let go. And just the practices that you're talking about and the things that we've started doing, I mean, I just feel like it just gives you that sense of, that you are in charge of your own healing and your own understanding, and there's not a right or wrong. And that is something that I really struggle with, the black and white, the right and wrong. We were doing an activity last week for one of the practices that we've started learning about. And it was like, that's all that kept coming into my head was, well, what if I'm doing this wrong? Nobody's telling me if I'm doing this wrong. What if I get to this thing that we're going to Saturday and I've done it all wrong, and so learning how to decide for yourself. I just think that's huge. It's huge for me. I don't know if it's huge for anybody else, but I just feel like so many of these other practices are allowing me to have more agency, and be okay with what my decisions are. And even if they, I make a decision and it's, doesn't turn out quite like I want it to, like, it's not the end of the world. That's okay. So anyway, that's my 2 cents about that.
I think sometimes within Christianity, we talk about discernment, but then we don't let people discern. So, and my feeling is, if I was a pastor for 20 years, if I didn't learn it in 20 years, I'm probably not going to, unless I learn to think differently. Anyway.
Yeah.
Can you deconstruct too far? Some of my friends have, I don't want to criticize people, but some of my friends have, deconstructed a certain amount, and then maybe they went back into a progressive or orthodox kind of practice. So they went back into religion, and they warned everybody else, don't deconstruct too far, you won't have anything left. It's faith or the abyss. You're going to go into, then they start quoting Nietzsche, that you're going to, I mentioned that before. Can you deconstruct too far?
I don't think so. And that's my opinion. And that's interesting that you're mentioning that there's some people who, I guess, they go into nihilism, or perhaps they kind of stay in a really bitter place, perhaps. I think that's the trap, is going either into nihilism or just being really, really bitter. But in terms of deconstruction, I don't think you can go too far. It's really what is going to be healthy for you. So if it's all like nihilism, then I would wonder, like, what's happening, in your life, in your surroundings, and what are you addressing, what are you not addressing? I'd be very curious to know what's happening, because I don't think that should happen. Right. I don't know if that's healthy. So that would be a good indicator to really do some self-inquiry. And I don't know if it's about deconstruction. I think that's more about just mental health.
Healing, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what would be your advice to the desert dwellers? We call it the desert because it feels like the desert when you start deconstructing. So what would be your advice to desert dwellers? And maybe you can attach this to it. We always ask people, what would you put on your billboard if you had a billboard that everybody could see? We never prepare anybody for that. So give you 2 questions at once. Maybe you can figure it out while you do it. But what would be your advice to the desert dwellers?
I would say that I know it is difficult, and it could definitely feel like you're wandering in the desert. And at the same time, I think there's a certain beauty to it, and that you're not alone. I think, Karl and Laura, you guys have a wonderful group, a podcast, ministry, helping people with this, and you don't have to do it alone. You can really hear people's stories. I think that really helps. And I think at the end of the day, really going back to trusting yourself, right? What do you resonate with? What is going to be life-giving? What is going to be authentically true for you? Maybe not what's objectively true. That's a really great question. I don't know. But what's subjectively true for you that, you're going to leave feeling like, this is me, and this is what I'm excited about. This is what gives me life and gives other people life, right? So you really get to experiment and trust yourself. And, there's a community of people who are doing this. And I think that's really, really important. So, and if, and this is just me, I have a personal bias. If you do suspect there is perhaps trauma, or there's something that, is really bothering you, like deeply bothering you from religion, then it might be good to look into a counselor or a coach or just somebody that can maybe help you deal with that, root out any hurt, any pain, and reprogram your subconscious mind for what you really do want.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I would say.
Yeah.
I love how you said to really hear each other's stories. And I think you have to be careful with that, you know, and I'm grateful that we do have a space for that, and you have a space for that where people can truly be heard. I think for so long we were even in the mindset when we were in religion of we've got to fix people, right? And so it wasn't a matter of them having their own, you know, authenticity. Really, it was, you know, we've got to fix this, and you've got to be like everybody else in this church. So I love the fact that we're in a space now where we can hear one of their stories and just sit with people in their stories, and for you to actually coach people as they're, you know, coming through whatever it is in life that they're coming through. So yeah.
I have one more question. So every thing I listen to, we're doing some inner medicine kind of
Work.
training right now, and I just keep hearing the word listening. And I made a statement on social media that a couple of people wanted to kill me, but you know, it's said maybe instead of listening to so many sermons, we should have been listening to each other. How good is listening? How important is listening? And what's important about listening? Or whatever you want to say.
Question.
Say something about listening.
Yeah. You know, it's funny because, you know, people ask what I do, and I'm like, well, 80% of it I feel like is me just listening to people's problems, you know. And you know what? That goes a long way. As many criticisms as I have with traditional talk therapy, there are some aspects to that really are good and that do work. And so, you know, I think listening, it makes people feel heard, feel seen. It builds trust and understanding and rapport. And you can actually, I think when you really listen, you can't help but to feel some kind of empathy. Maybe you disagree with the person, but at the very least, you can come away with knowing that, okay, they are a human being with a human experience. Maybe I disagree or agree, but you know what? I respect this human being that's in front of me. And when it comes to healing and the work that I do, I mean, listening is definitely 80%, if not more, 90% of what I do. And it's when I'm not listening, when I'm distracted or whatever, that's when things start going to crap, right? With the session. But it's when I'm actually present and listening that things continue to move forward and that there's healing that can happen. So yeah, listening can be absolutely very, very healing.
You know, Seth Price, Can I Say This at Church podcast? He's one of the first people that interviewed me a long time ago for my first book. And we talked to him the other day, and I said, you know what? I said when we do podcasts, listening to someone else's story for 45 minutes, when I do that, there is a certain level of intimacy that happens just by me listening to their story. And I said, does that happen for you? He said, yeah, when you're doing it right, it does. You know what I mean? And that just seems to keep coming up for me, mainly because I've been so horrible at listening over the years. And now I'm kind of learning that at a deeper level, and it's exciting, and it's transforming, not just for other people, but for me. So I think it's really important.
Yeah. And I think that I've always believed that we're hardwired for connection. And so just really listening to somebody, like you said, Justin, even if you don't agree with them, there's still this connection, right? Like just because you have that empathy, you have that respect for them, that compassion, for them as you're listening to their story. Like we don't have to agree to find connection with one another.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely.
So, you're doing some amazing work, and, we know that there's going to be some listeners who want to know how they can get in touch with you. So can you share the best way to contact you if they have any questions, or they're wondering about, hypnotherapy or anything else that you might offer?
Sure. Yeah. Best way to reach me would probably be on Facebook. My Facebook handle is I was just in trance, play on words. Or you can go to my website, redeemyourreality.com, or email me at redeemyourreality@gmail.com.
Okay.
So that'd be the best way.
Okay.
Perfect.
Awesome. This has been good. So
Yes.
went by fast. There's
It always
a
does, yeah.
lot more questions I want to ask you.
I have to have you back on.
That would be lovely. Thank you.
The the desert world, the deconstruction world is not perfect. I think you identified one thing, in there that is key to whether people are really healing or not, is that some people get to that point where they realize there's darkness, they're going to need some healing, and they sometimes just say, no, that looks too painful for me. It looks like too much work.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't do the work. There is work involved.
Yeah.
We all say after the fact it's worth it, but it's hard work.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And so in many cases, there's a lot of damage that's happened. And some of it you're not aware of, like you said. And we need to do the work. We got to show up and do the work, be present.
Yeah.
And then the waves will kind of present themselves.
Yeah.
So grateful. Anything else?
Yeah. No, this has been a really good conversation.
Anything else you didn't get to say that you'd like to say before we go?
Yeah, I just riffing off of what you were saying, sometimes we're not ready to look at it, and that's okay. It's okay to, I think that's the first step, is like, if it's too much and you're not willing, just to acknowledge and accept that. And sometimes there's been so much pain in my life that I was not willing to look at, and I wasn't ready, and maybe I don't think it was the right timing. Sometimes it's just not the right timing, and then another time it will be. So be patient with yourself, and it is worth it, like you said.
Yeah. So go out and find Justin out there through the contacts that we talked about. Thank you for tuning in today and listening to us. We appreciate you as a listener, getting involved in conversations, keeping the conversations going out here. We appreciate it. And as always, be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary.
Remember, all that wander in the desert are not lost. We hope that you know
you are seen,
you are heard,
and you are loved.